Hello geographers and welcome to a bonus lesson from the Changing China unit. In this lesson you're going to attempt to plan a tour of China's landmarks and places of interest, but it's not going to be easy because you're going to have to meet some specific criteria. So the first thing I'd like to do is to make sure you can write down today's date and title into your notes. So if you've not already done so, make sure you grab yourself a pen and a paper and pencil, etc. Okay, let's begin. So the first thing I'd like to think about is what we'd expect to find in a tourist brochure. Now on the right hand side you can see a variety of the sorts of tourist brochures that are seen in travel agents. Now if you've not been into one before, they often used to provide really thick brochures full of information of destinations around the world. So what I want you to really think about is if you were a traveller going somewhere new, what sort of information would you want to know before visiting that location? Try and come up with at least 5 different ideas. So really think carefully, what would you need to know? Pause the video now so you can have a go at coming up with some ideas. Okay, if you're ready, let's go through some different points that you might have also included. So before booking a holiday, travellers will often want to know, firstly, transport. How are they going to get to places? What sort of transport's available? How much will it cost them to use that transport? They might also want to know what type of accommodation's available. How much is it going to cost to go self-catering where they buy all of their meals once they're there? Or is it perhaps better to go all-inclusive? Could they perhaps stay on a campsite? Those are the sorts of questions a traveller might want to know. They might also want to know what sorts of things they can eat when they're at that location, or in some cases, what sort of things they should avoid. They'd like to probably see a variety of attractions or landmarks and museums, so knowing what things to visit when they're there will make sure that they use the best of their time. They might also be quite open to when to go, and so that could be determined by the climate that's experienced at different times of the year. They might want to know what currency to take. They might also want to know if there are certain festivals that occur in the location that they're visiting and maybe either coincide a visit or perhaps avoid that time if it's going to be too busy. So there's a whole variety of things that travellers often want to know when they're booking a holiday or a visit somewhere. So I want you to bear that in mind because you're going to try and plan a tour of China, and those are the sorts of things you're going to have to consider. So if you haven't done so already, you might want to jot some more of those down if you haven't already got them written in your notes. So pause the video now to do that. If not, you can carry on listening to your next task. So, can you plan a tour of China? This is your, I suppose you could call it your brief. It's a couple in their late 20s would like to visit China for 2 weeks in May and see as many major sites and landmarks as possible. So you've got 2 people, they're relatively young, they want to go away for 2 weeks to China and they're going in May. Now they've got £5,000 to spend, but that needs to cover their transport, accommodation, meals and entry to any attractions. So we're going to assume that they've organised their flight from wherever they normally live to China already. But they've got £5,000 to spend for the 2 weeks that they're in China, which sounds like quite a sizable amount. Okay, but you might find once you get into this that this becomes a little bit tricky to accommodate. Now they're keen to travel as sustainably as possible, so they're reluctant to fly if they can avoid it. They've already been to see one travel agent and they've already provided an itinerary which you can see on the next slide, but it's going to end up over budget and they're hoping that you can do better. So there's a couple of things to bear in mind here. You've got a budget, you've got £5,000 that you can kind of use, but it's got to cover how they're going to get to the different places they're going to visit because they want to go to different landmarks and major sites in China. So you need to think about the best way to get around. They don't want to fly because it's not sustainable. So they could go by train, they could go by car perhaps if there's, or maybe on a bus if they're sharing with other people would be better. You need to think about the accommodation. Now the normal port of call is to think of a hotel. But maybe you could think outside the box there. Are there different ways that maybe they could spend time in China and really get to know the culture? What sort of meals are you going to suggest for them? Are you going to suggest that they eat at a restaurant every day, in which case that might become expensive? Or are you going to give them some suggestions of the sorts of things that they could buy from Chinese supermarkets? If they go to visit attractions, you might need to find out the cost of entry. So quite often they're going to have to pay if they want to visit certain things. Okay, so there's lots of things to consider there. So I'm going to show you an example itinerary and get you to use that as your starting point. Okay, so this is a tour that's been put together by Travel China, and you can see it's 2 weeks in total. We've got 14 days there, and it's starting in Beijing. So they've got a whole variety of different places that they're going to. They're going to be seeing things like the Great Wall of China. They're going to be going to see the Terracotta Warriors. They can go to Shanghai and a whole variety of different things. So that might give you a variety of ideas that you could use and incorporate in your own tour. But, and this is the problem, it says in total this tour should cost around £3,500 for the accommodation. Notice quite a lot of the time they're saying stay at the budget hotel and giving an example of one to go to. But that's still going to cost £3,500 to stay in those budget hotels for the 2 weeks. They've then got flights. So they're actually flying between the different locations. But that's going to cost them £2,300 for those flights, bringing it to a total of £5,800, which is over budget. And it doesn't include the cost of meals, tickets to attractions, or anything else they might want to buy while they're there. So clearly, although it's a starting point, it's by no means perfect. So the first thing I'd like you to do is make sure you've got a printout of that tour, and you're going to try and highlight some of the key attractions on there. Now, you don't need to do all of the ones that are on there, and you might also have some other ideas that you want to include as well. So you need to have a list of attractions that you think it might be good for the couple to go and visit. And then you're going to try and accommodate as many of those into your tour. Okay. The second thing I'd like you to do is to start looking into transport options. If you want to go and see certain attractions, you need to think about how they're going to get there and the order that you're going to do them in. There's no point going to the far west of the country if your next landmark is on the far east of the country. You want to try and think about where they are spread and how straightforward it is to get to the different places. Okay, so you might need to do this alongside a map of China or something so that you can see where some of these attractions are located. So that's your first task. Work out the attractions you want to go to and the order perhaps you're going to do them, linking it in with the transport options. Okay, so pause the video and have a go at doing that first. Right then, so you've got your starting point. You know what attractions you want to take them to. You know some of the transport links that you might potentially be able to use. You're now going to try and bring it together and put it into some sort of presentation. Now, it could be that you want to use something like PowerPoint, Google Slides, Google Docs. It's up to you how you present it, but it needs to be in a way that the couple can understand the tour from their perspective. It can be nice and straightforward, like the example that we've seen. So you could present it just like that, or you might want to go into a bit more detail, add some pictures and so on of where you're choosing. Okay, but remember the criteria. You need to try and include as many of these things as possible, bearing in mind it's for 2 people. They've got a £5,000 budget, 2 weeks, and they're starting from Beijing, so they need to get back to there in order to get their flight home afterwards, which you don't need to include, remember, in the £5,000. All meals, transport, accommodation and entrance tickets to be included in that £5,000, and you're going to be as sustainable as possible. Okay, so it's quite a lot to get your heads around there. So I'd suggest you take some real time to think about how you want to approach this. Now, as a starting point, as well as the information you've already got, there's a variety of websites here that you might want to look at to try and get some ideas of how to do the tours themselves. Okay, so you might want to use that as a way of doing some research. Okay, so pause the video there and get cracking. Can't wait to hear what you come up with. Okay. Okay, once you've had opportunity to present and go through your different ideas, if you're in a classroom setting, it'll be great if you can hear what other people have planned out as well. If not, why not get somebody to look through your tour that you've designed and see how well you've addressed each of the different points of the criteria? Have you always got accommodation for 2 people? Have you stuck to your budget? Is the tour a total of 2 weeks, and do they manage to get back to Beijing where they start? Have you made sure that they've got examples of meals they can buy? Have you made sure you've factored in the cost of transport as well as accommodation and the tickets to get into certain landmarks? And also, and this is the kicker because this is often quite tricky, how have you made sure that it's sustainable as a tour? Okay, think about the impact that they might be having on the environment and also on the local culture. So it'd be really interesting to know what measures you've included. Okay, I'll stop there then, guys. Thanks for listening. Bye.